Welcome everyone to Schmoozic. I'm Danielle Ames Spivak, the Executive Vice President and CEO of the Friends of the Israel Philharmonic. I'm so glad you're here with us this evening. We're so grateful for your support and participation, and we look forward to many more programs this summer. This program was made possible by Aspiration, a financial services company that is partnering with the Israel Philharmonic to reduce the orchestra's carbon footprint and to donate instruments to our education programs. To learn more, please visit partners.afipo.org. I'm so delighted. I have not felt this giddy in such a long time. Jill Kargman, thank you so much for being here with us. And to Stacy Bronfman, who introduced us, I'm so grateful. How are you doing tonight?
I'm so thrilled to be here. Thank you, Danielle. It's so good to screen meet you across the country.
I just noticed your love pillow in the background. I love it. So cool.
Oh, thank you. John Darien, my fave.
I feel like we could talk for hours about everything from Hollywood to Jewish identity, to comedy, to parenting, all of the above. I'm just going to dive in with a few questions, but I encourage everyone watching on the chat function to please submit your questions. We'll get to you in a little bit. I'm sure, like me, many of you are huge fans of yours, Jill. I've read all your books, I said to you earlier, and your show. You just tell it like it is in such a refreshing way. I feel like I know you already from kind of getting your sense of humor and your perspective on the world. And in an era when it's so hard to know what's true and what's false, so nice to have someone that, you know, you really believe their opinions are just honest and not filtered. So please be your usual self here tonight. And we're going to get into some, I think, interesting things. I want to ask you, were you born funny like this? Like, were you doing this as a child, doing shows for your parents and your brother? And
yes, my parents, my mom and dad, my parents are hysterically funny. So I think it's nature and nurture, but my mom is hysterical. Everyone always said, your dad is so funny and your mom's so pretty, but my mom is just as funny as my dad. And she's French Orthodox, was sitting upstairs, not like the wig, but fully ortho kosher home. And yet she still had a hysterical sense of humor. And I think my parents are just a really good match. They've been married for 49 years. And I had a really happy childhood. I mean, a lot of comedy writers they find the humor in strife, but I grew up in a really just lucky, happy household, which is great. But I don't know if people are born funny or what, but I definitely grew up in a house with a shitload of laughter and even finding the humor in tragic things. I feel like if you don't laugh, you'll cry, especially right now. It's just been a hard few years, especially as Jews, especially lately. And humor is sort of a navigation tool that keeps us all afloat, but I don't really know any other way to be. It's sort of hardwired, I guess.
so I didn't know that about, or didn't remember about your mother. So you must have grown up with quite a strong Jewish identity, considering your mom's upbringing. And obviously you live in a very Jewish city, in a very Jewish neighborhood. You know what?
Well, I was a bit of a rebel. I mean, I'm not going to lie. Like growing up, I feel like the Jewish identity was there. I mean, I was very close to my grandfather. I lost my grandmother when I was very young. She died at the age I am now, actually. And my grandfather was so religious and went to the morning minyan and at Shereth Israel, the Sephardic synagogue on 70th and Central Park West, and was very into it. And we were very, very close until his death when I was 33. And I'm now 46, almost 47. But I felt like I wanted to be a better person for him because he's such a good person. I like could cry. It's so sad because he's such a good man. But I still had my rebellious phase where when I was maybe 12, 13, I said, like, I'm never going to marry a Jewish guy because they're all up to my boobs and like they're short dwarfs and they have big noses and I'm never going to marry a Jew. And my dad said, and my dad is like totally reform / agnostic / Boston assimilationist. And he said, you know, sweetie, I had a friend who was not very Jewish, married this like blonde shiksa goddess, and they had a big fight and she called him a dirty Jew. And that was the end of the marriage. Like, you want your partner to understand who you are. And even if it's not a big section of who you are, it's just kind of that ribbon of your soul that's Jewish. You want that to be mirrored in your partner. And it's just going to make marriage more complicated if you keep being obsessed with these like waspy guys with reversible names. Because every guy I thought was hot was like Prescott Sykes Bennett the fourth, you know? And the higher the Roman numeral, the smaller the dick.
So that's actually kind of like your show, right? That was your fantasy kind of.
Yeah. Like in the show, we decided it wasn't even really my choice. It was more of like the writer's room and the network and everyone discussed together that it would heighten the other odd mom outness if I was married into a really waspy family, so that I was just further alienated. But in real life, I married a nice Jewish boy.
So that was a question I wanted to ask. Is it true you were set up by your Jewish grandmothers?
Yes, totally true. It's so Fiddler on the Roof. I call it shtetl chic. When my grandfather died, I just graduated college, and another person, not my husband's, called Harry, and another grandmother at the Shiva had a grandson named Adam, and said, oh, did I lose you? Sorry.
I lost you, but your picture is pretty.
Hi, I'm back. Sorry, that was my daughter clicking in. I had this other grandmother fix up this guy called Adam, and she said, you know, I want to set you with my grandson Adam. So I met him and I got like a blowout. I was done with my college sweetheart, and this was my first man, not boy, not guy. It was a man. And I got all ready in New York City for my first date with a real grown up. And I walked into the Red Cat in Chelsea, which is now gone. And he said, I see this hot guy. And he goes, Jill. And I was so excited. I was wearing a new Agnes B. I remember what I was wearing. And he said, my grandmother's tote would drop dead if she knew, but I'm gay. And she would be dead on the floor.
Was that the first thing he said to you?
That was the first thing he said to me.
Like
I gave him a hug. He was gorgeous, of course. And he said, I'm totally gay. My grandma would die. Like my Nana would be dead, chalk outline on the floor. So my heart sank because he was so cute. And then his boyfriend wound up meeting us for dinner and we became great friends. But so later, then I had another relationship. Then I met Harry at 25. I was 26. I just turned 26. And his grandmother said, like, I want to fix you up with my grandson. And I was like, he probably knows what a dick tastes like. I didn't say that because then I would murder her and have blood on my hands. But I went along with it. And we wound up like hitting it off that first night. I mean, we had the best time. We were laughing so hard. It felt really familiar. And that's not necessarily a religion thing. It's more of a cultural, I don't know. It's like seeing a part of yourself in somebody else that I don't know that I could see in somebody who believes in like Jesus Cristo.
Right. No, I totally hear you on that. I mean, we like to say like music with the Israel Philharmonic is a universal language, but there's something to be said about like the universalness of like certain aspects of just Jewish upbringing and culture, that when you're with someone, it's not even what's said or what's done, but there's just kind of a feeling of familiarity there.
Yeah.
So you were set up, you married this great Jewish guy, you have children. I'm going to fast forward a little bit here. I lost you too. There you go.
Sorry, I'm back.
That's okay. So I read, that you actually had to deal with some instances with your son in school where he faced anti-Semitism. And, I think that probably comes as a shock to a lot of people, knowing that you live in New York City and how big the Jewish community is. We know there's a lot of anti-Semitism in New York, but I read that story and I just would love you to tell us from your perspective what happened there and how you handled it as a parent, because I think a lot of parents right now are thinking about these issues.
Okay, well, I don't want to alienate anyone watching whose kids are in Jewish day school, because I have no problem with Jewish day school. It wasn't the right choice for us. I didn't grow up in Ramaz. Like I went to WASPy schools. I had people who were Black and Asian and Christian and Lebanese and whatever, Muslim. It was just, I was never cloistered in that sort of Jewish world. And so I was at Hebrew school. I was bat mitzvahed, and we had my mother's shul and then my central synagogue. And I had a very strong Jewish identity, but my education was definitely like very diverse. So it didn't even cross my mind to send them to Jewish school, which is why it was really shocking after the shit went down on social media. People were like, well, that's what you get for not sending them to Heschel. And I was like, I was never going to send them to Heschel. Not that there's anything wrong with Heschel, but like, there is a kosher police that will like rat on you for not having like kosher shit at your party. Like, that's not who I am. Like, I am reform. I like clamps. Okay. Sorry. So, I was kind of shocked when my son, and by the way, like a lot of the stuff on social media was like, oh, our son got bullied. He was never bullied. He was class president. Like this kid was not bullied. Some dipshit, who I called Rolf from Sound of Music, said to my son, God sent Hitler down to kill the Jews because you nailed Jesus to the cross. And his grandfather was a pastor in a red state. And that was literally, apparently, from what I've heard, was what he was taught in Sunday school in New York City. So I went completely shithouse. I called the school. I actually had just had a surgery. So my husband really like picked up my whole cloak of, rage, because I was otherwise engaged. And it was really upsetting. And my husband's a really good guy. He doesn't get as emotional as I do. And he said, like, this is completely unacceptable that this kid had no punishment whatsoever. And when, subsequently the following year, the same kid, we left the school. We said, we're out of here. Bye.
So it was that instance that made you decide to leave the school?
Well, it was actually a follow-up to, in the grade above, there was another Jewish family that the kid said he was going to summer camp, and the kid goes, is it Camp Auschwitz? And the school did nothing then either with that class. And we had all heard about it and we were outraged, but there's just like a double standard with stuff like that. And then when a kid had said the N-word, he was expelled right away. So I was sort of like, what's the fucking difference? One, yes, that kid should be expelled. N-word, unacceptable. So is referencing the Holocaust and the murder of all these children. So we were so outraged that we just yanked the kid from the school. And then the Rolf that fall actually did say the N-word and he got expelled. He had like 2.5 strikes. But with the N-word, it's like a one chance thing. You're out. And with Jewish things, it's, oh, he's only 11 years old. Oh, he didn't mean it. Oh, it's not the same thing as saying the N-word. Whereas I'm saying, yes, it fucking is. So I just was so incensed that I pulled my kid out in July, and we had to pick him up from summer camp and be like, you're not going back to your school, which was really sad because he was crying on his Belgian waffles. But I love my friends. He didn't want to leave. He loved it. He was class president. He wasn't like some bullied little pummel weakling. He was kind of a rock star. And we said, like, we're done. That place did not make us feel safe. And I'm not a big, like, I need my safe space, but like, I certainly don't want someone talking about Nazis and Hitler is sent by God, like, bye. So we were out of there and never looked back. Like, it's in our rearview mirror. And in fact, when I heard this kid was expelled, someone said like, oh, and they left the city. Someone said to me like, oh, they got run out of town. I was like, I don't care. Like, that is all in my rearview mirror. We are so happy in our school. It has a rainbow flag outside. There's gay parents. There's parents of every religion. And if anyone ever said anything like that, they would be out. Like, there's a zero tolerance policy. So, it was during that whole Brett Kavanaugh thing. And it was an all boys school. And I think that sometimes kids get a little bro-y and can fall down that. And I think it's just, our new chapter is such a better fit for our family. And I just feel so much happier and safer. And I feel like, in a weird way, as much as I hated going through that and having my son cry to hear that, it's kind of a good thing we had that little shit in our class, because we just got out of there and we're in a place that would just never stand for that.
Yeah, I mean, I know you wouldn't have sought it out to begin with, but you clearly kind of created a learning situation for your kids by experiencing that. And unfortunately, it is there in the world, and some kids only experience it when they go to college, which is happening a lot today. So maybe in the end, they're better prepared at a younger age. So, and then I read something else that you said about a trip you took to Amsterdam. Did I get that right? Did you visit Anne Frank's house?
Yeah, so one of the really weird lucky things that happened to us, that really reshaped 2020 for us, is that Christmas vacation came up for my kids in 2019. And, teenagers are kind of followers, and they said, I want to go to Turks and Caicos. What's this Turks and Caicos? And I hate beaches. I know I'm weird. I don't like some like heat vacations. And I said, I am not going to some island to rot for 2 weeks. Like, we want to do something educational. And they were complaining. They were whining. They really wanted to go to some beach place and were showing me Instagrams of websites. And I said, listen, Daddy found that we could go to Holland for free, basically, with points. And Sadie, my eldest, said, my 18-year-old said, what's the temperature in Holland? And I said, it's the same as New York. Like, you are not going to some palm tree where it's 80 degrees. Sorry, no suntan for you. And they were kind of like, what's Holland? What's the food like? Sure enough, we get there. They had the time of their lives. I have one friend there who's Christian, who had us for the most beautiful Christmas dinner. We went to the Van Gogh Museum and the Rijksmuseum, and I've kind of cultivated their taste in Dutch art and flowers and vanitas paintings, and they loved it. I mean, the food was not great. My dad always jokes, like, when do you ever say, like, hey, you guys want to go out for Dutch? But we sought out, we went to a pizza place, and we went to some Asian fusion place, and they have poffertjes, the little Dutch pancake things that we ate every single day. So we wound up having the time of our lives. Our very last day, like January 3rd, so 6 weeks before the first death of COVID, we were in the Anne Frank house. And my girls had read the Anne Frank's diary and learned about it at Central Synagogue. And they, of course, learned about the Holocaust, but it's not the same as being in Europe and hearing those creepy neener, neener, like those sirens. It just makes it come alive, where you're like, you see that? That was a wealthy Jewish family's house, and they all got rounded up, and this is what happens. Like, it just feels so foreign when you're American. And even though I have European family, my kids didn't fully grasp it. And they were standing in Anne Frank's apartment, and I said, she's sharing this room with a dude in his 20s. This is like, 500 square feet, cut to the entire world is in lockdown, in quarantine. Nothing bothered my kids. Nothing bothered them. And by the way, my kids are not like polishing their halos. They can be kvetches and whiners, whatever, all the time. 2020, they were aces. They did not give a shit about being locked down. And they had friends who, I heard my middle daughter, I was walking by, and she was on FaceTime with her friend who was in like a mansion in the Hamptons, saying, this is a nightmare. And this is such a nightmare. And Ivy's like, this isn't a nightmare. No one's coming to get us. Yeah, Anne Frank was hiding in her house, and if she got caught, she's going to be killed. And she was. Like, this is nothing. So I think that whole trip accidentally reframed our entire pandemic. And I kind of have survivor's guilt about it, because I feel bad that so many people died, but we had a very good year. And I think it's because of that trip to Amsterdam, because it really kept everything in perspective for my kids, which is why travel is really part of your education.
Yeah, and you're good parents, because you're not, no offense to beaches, but you're taking them to places that they can learn and
Fuck beaches. I hate beaches. They're so dumb.
I know. Well, I'm fair like you. I understand. But speaking of travel, have you ever brought your kids to Israel? Have they gone to Israel?
Yes. So we went for my younger two kids' bar mitzvahs. We actually did real bar mitzvahs in New York. I say real bar mitzvahs because the Israel bar mitzvah we did was like, they did one baby little verse. In New York, they did the full 3 thing. It was like the proper hour-and-a-half ceremony. They kind of did like en masse with our synagogue. We went for 2.5 weeks, and we didn't get to hear the Philharmonic. I wish we had. We were sort of at the mercy of a big, large group of our synagogue. But it was very interesting. And I think the kids learned a lot, and they really, really enjoyed themselves. And I feel like we kind of did Israel, because we went everywhere, all around the country. And, I felt very lucky to be there with my family, and I had never been until I went with my kids. I feel like my parents went on their honeymoon, and then there were a couple times where we were talking about going, and then it never was the right time, and there was danger or State Department warnings. And when we went, we really went, 2 years ago, right before all of this drama, and we kind of got in just in time, because I have my really good friend, whose daughter is there right now, and she didn't hear from her for 5 days. They were hiding in the forest, and then they were in a bomb shelter. I can't even imagine going through that. I'm not strong enough to probably handle that and come out intact. I would have flipped out. So I really feel for everybody who's there now, and Americans who have kids there, because especially if I sent my kids without me, I would have really flipped out. But they're all in my thoughts.
We were all kind of obviously worried about what was going on in Israel, to obviously Israelis and Palestinians. And then your amazing piece in Tablet came out, which by the way, we shared with everyone before today, because I wanted as many people to read it as possible, called "Has Everyone Gone Nuts?" And I wanted to kind of walk me through I read the piece, so I have a feeling I know what was going through your mind, but you kind of said a lot of what a lot of people were thinking, right? People are vacillating between being mystified. Some people were shocked. I wasn't, because I kind of feel like I was seeing this coming. But, what made you want to write that piece in such a public way? You are like a figure in entertainment, and, that's kind of brave.
You know what? Because I'm older than you, I just don't care. I have a really thick skin. I have very thick crocodile skin. I get death threats. I get so much hate from Jews too, by the way. I mean, I can't stand Donald Trump. I had so many Jews ripping me a new asshole, that he's good for Israel, and that I'm an idiot, and I'm a libtard, and I don't care. I don't think he's a decent man. And I don't think he's good for American Jewry, because he activated all of these neo-Nazis and white supremacists who are very good people on both sides in Charlottesville. So I was just outraged the last 4 years. And I started following people on social media who I thought, wrongly, who I thought were like-minded politically, people who were liberal and cared about women's reproductive rights and cared about gay marriage equality and all these things that are incredibly important to me as a New Yorker. And they started posting about how Israel is an apartheid state. And it was the most enraging thing. And I do feel like some people just have no education, and they didn't learn, about the complexities of Israel. And when people said, I can criticize Israel and it's not anti-Semitic, what they don't understand is that what they're actually criticizing is Israel's right to exist, because they really go deep. And when they criticize that is anti-Semitism. And I just felt like I was alone on an island, because I hated Donald Trump. So I'd already alienated all the Hasids and the extreme orthos who were just one issue Israel voters, which is not me. And then I was also alienating the left, who were just blindly saying that Israel's an apartheid state, which it's not. And I would try to say, well, I visited the Supreme Court actually when I was in Israel, and there's an Arab on the Supreme Court, and there are Arabs all over the place. Like, I don't know what the fuck you idiots are talking about. But somehow this mantle of Black Lives Matter and the left has taken on Palestine as their cause. And in fact, I was obsessed with the Tulsa, Oklahoma massacre. Before it was in fashion, I always was like, why does no one talk about this? And my husband and I knew all about it, and we were always really interested in it, and kind of horrified that people weren't talking about it. And then when I saw the 100th anniversary kind of tribute where this massacre happened had Palestinian flags on it, it was really distressing, because I feel like there's this kind of Venn diagram that's overlapping of these worlds that doesn't need to be there and doesn't make sense to me. I think any oppression is bad, but it's just been really just everyone's very misinformed about this alleged apartheid state in Israel. And I felt like I was kind of marooned in the middle, and that somehow the left has taken this mantle to call Israel the occupiers and the oppressors, when it's in fact not true. And it's very strange to find yourself on the same side as these assholes like Marjorie Taylor Greene that you despise. So that's why I wrote it.
Yeah, the last slide was good. It was spot on. I have a lot more questions, but Zach, first of all, I just want to encourage everybody to please use your chat function if you have a question for Jill. We're at about the halfway mark, or more than that now. So I'm going to pause and say, Zach, if there's any questions coming in from the audience for Jill, we'll go to that, and then maybe I'll add a few more at the end.
So we have a lot coming in. I would encourage everyone, whether you're watching on our AFIPO site or if you're watching on Facebook, write your questions in there. We're watching both of those. We'll ask Jill your questions live, so make sure to get them in. To start, we have Gunda asks, how do you keep relationships with non-Jewish friends who are hostile against the Jewish state and convey this notion with harmful stereotypes?
Okay, Glenda, thank you for your question. You're going to think that I'm such a baby, but so my best friend is the waspiest person on earth. She's the descendant of 2 US presidents, and she's like super pro-Israel. My answer is that I inculcate my friends and I educate them. I really only have like 7 really close friends, and 4 are Jewish and 3 are Christian. And the 3 who are Christian are just super pro-Israel. I'm like their sister, they're my sister, and they just, I talk to them about it, and I don't have any animosity in terms of disagreement on that front. I do have other people who are what I would call that sort of like secondary, tertiary level friend, who just don't see it the same way. And I've actually cut them out because they're not my best friends. Like, I really only care about the people I care about, and everybody else, there's no point. Like, only a fool argues with a fool. So Glenda, if you have people who are just not listening and hammering the other side, I just feel like it's worth pulling back a little bit. And there are some people who are actively toxic who I just excise like the malignant tumor that they are. And that's a bummer. I had a couple friends, not my inner circle. My inner circle is so loyal, and we do anything for each other, and they're godparents of my children, and I don't have to convince them. But there are a couple people where I try to engage and they just don't see it that way. And in 2 instances, they're gay, and they don't understand that they would be like fully stoned to death in the West Bank. And they just don't know what's good for them. I mean, it's too dumb for words. So I've just unfollowed them and cut them out. And I'm really not sad about it, because again, they were in my inner circle. But you know, New York, you see people and you share friends and friends of friends, and they're all that you have like a big social circle. And they're done. I'm done with them, because life's too short to keep idiots around.
And I'm sure for all the negativity, you get a lot of people quietly reaching out and being like, you said what I'm thinking, but I don't feel comfortable
A lot
publicly.
Yeah, it's funny. I like lost 1,000 followers, and then I got 1,000 followers that are Jewish. But the people I lost were like, what the fuck? I can't believe you're siding with these, ethnic cleansers. And I'm just like, see ya. And then the new people say like, I wish I could write this stuff, but I don't want to lose my job. And I can't say it, but thank you for saying it. And I feel like we have a simpatico, even if it's just, a digital relationship. I feel like they understand. And I respect that some people are not in industries where they can say what they want, or they're in a tricky situation. I'm lucky because I'm older. I have my family. I don't give a shit, but a lot of people are walking on broken glass whether it's with their careers or their friend groups. I'm lucky I don't have that problem, because I've weeded the friendship garden.
So that's a great segue to the next question, because I think you kind of answered a little bit, but maybe you can give a little more insight. Patricia asks, Does being Jewish in any way impede your ability to perform or participate in the industry in which you work?
Thank you, Patricia, for your question. My answer is no. I mean, I feel like it's a pretty Jewy industry. The only thing is that sometimes my humor gets very Jewish and I'm told to like scale it back a little bit, but it's nothing that feels, censorious. So when I had my show at Bravo and the president was super cool, Frances Burke, she was, British and she was very cool. Like I really liked her. The only notes we really got were toned down maybe 30% of some of the Jewish stuff. Like season 1, I was putting in a lot of Yiddish or things that weren't even political. It was just like private jokes. And they were kind of like, what the hell is this? So I pumised out some of it. And then I got more and more freedom. Then by season 2 and 3, we had a Yom Kippur episode called Fasting and Furious. And there were all these things where I felt like we got a little bit more freedom as time went on. But part of the character was that my Judaism was that otherness, so that I could really write that into the show, and that the family I'd married into that was German and had like dubious whereabouts in World War II. That was all part of the story, so it was fine. But I haven't had any other issues. I mean, I'm sure behind the scenes people are like, she looks too Jewish for this part, or she's too, whatever. But I don't give a shit. Like I feel pretty lucky that I'm not just writing for TV. I write articles or books and things that don't really, it doesn't matter. But I understand that people come against that. And I feel lucky that that's not really a concern, at least yet.
Of course, with your background, we're getting a ton of questions about Jewish identity in television, in film. With your success on Odd Mom Out, there's a ton of questions about how Jewish characters are represented. So Shai asks, how do you feel about Jewish characters being represented in TV and movies? Who do you feel are some of the positive three-dimensional Jewish characters on the TV sets today?
It's so funny. That's a great question. I was just saying, how come with my daughters, why, and I understand this argument, how come trans characters or Black characters need to be played by Black actors or trans actors, but Jewish actor, Mrs. Maisel is Catholic? I feel like that's not a cloak that I'm going to take up, because I do understand it's acting and you can learn how to play other parts. But so far, that's a double standard that I find interesting, that has not been a thing. Traditionally, I was watching Grease with my kids, and this character, Eugene, the nerd who keeps getting kind of pummeled by everyone, is clearly Jewish. And we Googled the actor, who's of course Jewish. And there is a lot of, Jewish characters that are these stereotypes that I can't stand. So the ones that I actually love are where they take a bit of a casting risk, like in Munich. And I just rewatched Munich, and I think it's fantastic. And I love Steven Spielberg, basically everything he does. And I really feel like there's such a sensitivity in Eric Bana's performance. And you would never know he's not Jewish, which is why I then double back and say, like, I don't think Jewish actors have to play Jews to get it. I like that Eric Bana and James Bond, played Jews in Munich. I don't think you have to be Jewish, but it's just, I was just more commenting that it's interesting that other minorities insist on having those minorities play their characters. But I really feel like the discussions and the writing and the performances, whether it's Jeffrey Rush, any number of actors in Munich, I think it's such a complex, beautiful movie. And I keep thinking about when he's like, but then we're just going to keep killing these Arab terrorists. I mean, then there's just going to be another one. And he's like, and Jeffrey Rush says, well, you clip your fingernails and they still grow back and you still clip them again. And it's just so difficult and complex and thought provoking. And I really think that movie is worth another watch. If you haven't seen it, or if you haven't seen it in a while, it's really beautiful. And to watch it with teenagers was very compelling. But I feel like, you know, of course there are stereotypes. There are stereotypes with everything, but you know, I do feel like it's going to get, you know, the more that you give Jewish writers that rope to create their own thing that's not as one dimensional, the more you're going to get. But I think a lot of times people are right now, it's all about diversity and having many different voices and younger voices. So being a middle-aged Jewish woman is probably not a great thing right now. But I'm going to still keep trying and pitching and doing what I'm doing and keeping my head down. And I don't care if I'm trendy or not. I'm just going to do what I do.
As a sort of part two to the question, Becky asks if you could narrow down on your thoughts on the way Jewish women in particular are represented on TV, like Mrs. Maisel or Melrose on Glow or Bevy from the Goldbergs.
I actually am not as familiar with all of those as I should be. I feel like it's very strange because as a comedy writer, everyone thinks that I watch comedy all the time, and I really don't. Like, I watch Peaky Blinders. That's my favorite show. I really love dramas. I loved Lord of the Rings, which makes no sense because I hate like wizards and flying things and shit like that. But my husband got me into that. He's a big sci-fi. I call him geek chic. He's in tech, and it kind of, if you know him, it kind of syncs up with his personality. But we don't watch that much comedy, so I'm not as privy as I should be probably. But I do feel like just traditionally, whether it's The Nanny or, you know, the comedy that I have seen, you definitely see that stereotype. But then, you know, time has shown there's also like a love for that show and the kind of a fabulosity that Fran Drescher brought to it. Even if there are stereotypes, she's beloved by Gentiles and Jews alike. And there is something kind of larger than life with that character. But yeah, I don't really know as much about comedy. It's strange. I really do love the drama. Although we did and this is a Jewish drama, but we loved Unorthodox. We all watched it as a family during COVID and found it so addictive. And I think we watched it in one night or maybe two, but my daughter and I are obsessed. One of my daughters was like, I want to watch more. I want to watch Tisla. I want to watch everything, because she's just so intrigued by ultra Orthodox, as they say in Israel, life and how the women deal. I've actually read more books than watched TV about it. But it is like a very intriguing point in my family, especially because we spend so much time in Williamsburg. We're like, we don't have a country house and we go to Brooklyn every weekend. And my daughter just obsesses about what her life would look like in that world. And it's so, when we were in Israel too, we went to Tzfat and we were all dressed like Laura Ingalls Wilder with like frills up our necks and everything. And they still called us whores. It was so weird. My rabbi he had words with these dudes. And Sadie, my eldest, said like, what they were talking about, what were they saying? And he's like, you don't want to know. And she's like, tell us, and kept like hammering. And he's like, they might have called you sluts. I was like, sluts? I look like Nellie Olson. Like every piece of my skin was covered, but we were still whores. So, you know, that was the one thing that was a little alienating about Israel for us. Like, well, we didn't feel fully at home until we were in Tel Aviv, I'll be honest, but Tzfat, no, I tease my rabbi, I wanted to get the tzfak out of there.
Well, I could go in so many directions with that, but Zach, I'm going to let you go on to the next question. Because I know there's a lot more and we're already almost 45 minutes in. This is amazing, Jill. So if anyone has any questions, this is kind of the moment to ask them. What else do we have, Zach?
So we just got one that came in. Leslie asks, what made you want to do a show about East Side moms?
Well, Leslie, I am one. I'm actually I call it Upper East Side adjacent. I live in Midtown, but I grew up on the Upper East Side and in the 70s. And I had a really down-to-earth childhood. We lived in a rental. I didn't, have a House in the Hamptons or any of that. And I just feel like even though I'm in the same neighborhood, it feels very different now. It became very showy when I had children, and parenting wasn't a verb when I was little. I feel like my mother, she was 23, she was super young and just took us to the park, and she wasn't reading all these books on parenting, and she just went from instinct, and she's an incredible mother. She would cook us every single meal. I'm like reheating shit in the microwave, and I don't know. I just feel like write what you know. And suddenly I felt like a stranger in my own world. It was a very fish out of water thing to have a kid. And I was 28 and pregnant out to here working at MTV, and ran into people that I knew who had kids, and they were teaching them Mandarin and putting, headphones with Mozart on the fetus so that they could be smarter, according to some study. And it just became this crazy thing about keeping up. And I knew I wasn't going to play that game. And I just wound up taking notes and observing. And my husband said, "This is your show." Because I would come home from baby classes and tell him stories about just these moms. And he said, this is your next project. This is a world. And I wrote a book called Momzilla's, kind of based on my first 3 years of motherhood. And that was sort of the genesis for Odd Mom Out. So I was really just writing what I knew, to be honest, but I had written for TV for many years. I had different pilots that were more in the fashion world, and then MTV. I worked for MTV News docs, like this MTV News specials. And I really enjoyed that, but it was really fun to be able to write about the world that I'm kind of in. And people always ask me if I felt like I was alienating people, and in fact, not at all. People very much like to have that kind of keyhole into the world, even if it was their world. And I think it made some people feel a little less alone, because there are more people like myself than I thought who didn't have, 3 nannies and lessons and someone to cut the grapes into quarters and all that crap.
My favorite episode is the one where you did the spinning fundraiser for, I don't remember.
Yeah, that's the pilot. Yeah.
Yeah, it was I didn't even remember it was the pilot, but like, I remember a lot of them, especially later on. But you have this amazing ability to say what people are thinking. And so I'm curious, not necessarily if you're actually going to be doing this project, but if you could do a project that you felt like was saying what you think people are feeling but hasn't been said, what would it be?
I really want to do something now. This is like a show I've been trying to work on now. I'm just like at the very nascent stage, but there's being a New Yorker, and I'm sure you have this in LA too. Sometimes you feel like you don't have a witness, like you're walking around by yourself and you witness an interaction and you think to yourself, only in New York or only in LA. And so I want that to be a show where you kind of have these glimpses of different people that all intertwine, that could only happen in that city. And I feel like it's an idea that could happen. It could go everywhere. It could be only in Atlanta, only in Chicago. So that's what I'm working on right now. And I feel like that's the type of thing where you're walking around your city that you love by yourself, and you witness something and you feel like you're the only one in that moment. You are the only one in that moment, but there are a million parallel snippets at that exact time where people feel the same thing. And that makes you feel less alone to watch these kind of moments. So you could watch an interaction and say, I've totally seen something like that, or these totally disparate worlds colliding. And maybe it's a fight, maybe it's a love affair, maybe it's something in a restaurant, but it just is what makes living in cities so special, is that diversity and different opinions and cultures coming up against each other and generally getting along really well.
I love that. It's like when people cancel on me, like work meetings, because it rains in LA. And I grew up
so weird. They think it's acid there. We meet in a full sleet snowstorm. It's like rain. I love a rainy day. I can't even imagine. It's so funny to me.
Zach, what else do we have?
We have 3 more on the slate here. So Emily says, I really enjoyed your Stairway to Cabaret performance at
thanks,
Cafe
Emily.
Carlisle.
Thank you for coming to that.
Post-COVID world, do you have any plans to perform again?
No, you know what, Emily? I really love doing that. So that was a show I did at Williamstown Theater Festival in the Berkshires, and they, Mandy Greenfield, who I went to college with, is a director there, the director of Williamstown Theater Festival, which is a huge summer theater festival in the Berkshires in Massachusetts here. And we had been talking about doing a sort of a black box performance. And so I did that show, and I did heavy metal covers as a middle-aged woman, and kind of reappropriating these really sexist songs with these monologues, stories about my life interspersed. And I loved it. I had the time of my life. And then what Emily saw was a little bit of a shrunken version at the Carlisle Hotel, at Cafe Carlisle. And I loved doing it, but I was home at midnight every night, and it was just too late for me. And I didn't get to see my kids at night. I saw them in the morning. I mean, now I have 3 teenagers, so I probably, down the road, I probably could do another, but it was something that was always a dream of mine. And I got to kind of check that box, and I loved it. It exceeded my expectations and was exactly the dream that I had envisioned. But I was very depleted. I mean, I bow down to theater actors and performers because they really leave a pound of flesh on the stage every night. And I felt like I couldn't get out of bed the next morning. It's very tiring. It really changes your whole schedule into kind of a vampire. So I don't know that I could do that again, unless I had an empty nest and I could really sleep as late as I wanted. But it took a lot out of me, because you warm up. Then I was, kind of keeping to myself. I had to save my voice every day. So I was marching in the Women's March, and I couldn't yell anything. I just had my signs that said a woman's place is in the revolution, but I couldn't yell and scream. I mean, you really have to protect your voice so that you don't let down the audience. So it's weird to think about that stuff, but I don't think I can do it yet, like at this phase in my life. But thank you for coming, Emily. It was the time of my life. I had best time doing it.
No, it's such a good question. And I want to tell you, we have a smaller hall. It's part of our Charles Bronfman Auditorium in Tel Aviv, but we do a lot of multidisciplinary work. It seats a few hundred, not a few thousand, called Zucker Hall. And maybe one day we'll get you to come and do a few nights in Tel Aviv with the Israel Philharmonic in some cool show.
I'm definitely not worthy. I'm not Broadway level. I would say I'm like off Broadway, and it worked, and we sold out the Cafe Carlisle, but I'm not Broadway level. I think the Israel Philharmonic deserves a serious vocalist, which is not me. I'm more of like a rocker girl.
We adore you. You're being very modest, but
no, I'm telling the truth. Believe me, I would.
Well, I wouldn't make you sing opera, that's for sure.
Oh no, I would like crack the windows with like stained glass would be falling to the floor.
Zach, I have a few more, but I want to let the last few go to the viewers, and we're so grateful to the audience who's joined us tonight.
So we're going to move from heavy metal at Cafe Carlisle to classical music. Dr. Helga Wall-Appelt asks you, Jill, what is, if any, your personal involvement with classical music? Namely with conductors who are so close to the Israel Phil, like Zubin Mehta, Lahav Shani, or Itzhak Perlman.
Okay, Dr. Helga, I am so sorry. I feel horrible, but I really have no relationship except that Itzhak Perlman's daughter grew up with me. I knew her growing up. But I really don't, aside from Broadway, I have no exposure. I went to the opera a lot, and I went to the New York Philharmonic as a child, but really I go to the ballet. So my mother danced with School of American Ballet and is on the board there, and we go to the ballet a lot. So the New York City Ballet Orchestra is impeccable. They are just incredible. So it's really Tchaikovsky, a lot of the composers that composed for the ballet. And that's my passion. I mean, it's usually attached to ballet, and I love the ballet. I go a lot. I mean, I haven't been recently, but I have actually watched some Zoom ballets, which is not the same. And I'm very eager to go back. June 9th, I'm going to the ballet. And then I'm very eager to go as soon as everything is back in order in the fall. But I'm obsessed with the ballet, and the music is obviously a huge part of it. But that's really my main exposure to classical music is New York City Ballet.
So I think we'll close out the Q&A portion on this question here. Obviously, Jill, you know how to make a splash. It's something you've done recently on social media. So of course we get a question, this question from Shai that says, there's a whole range of celebrity Jewish voices and opinions out there on social media. Which famous Jewish person whom you don't agree with on social media would you like to sit down with to have an in-person nuanced conversation about what it means to be Jewish in America?
Wow.
I guess Sarah Silverman, because I really respect her. I love her comedy. I think she's so hysterical. I follow her, and I follow Bernie Sanders, and I don't agree with all of their comments, but I do think Sarah's so funny that her humor can be a weapon. And I really admire her. I've worshiped her my whole life and career. I think she's a riot, but she's a little to the left of me. So I would definitely want to have that conversation, just because I think when you go to Israel and you talk to people, and my kids went to Ramallah with my husband, my son and I went on an archaeological dig. It was like that, like Disneyfied Raiders of the Lost Ark thing. We found like pottery shards and it was 110 degrees. But my husband took my girls to Ramallah and met with the Palestinian prime minister, and came back and reported. I really wish I had been with them, but my son was begging for this archaeological moment. But I do feel like when you're there and you really talk to people, you just learn so much, and it's not as black and white as the liberal Jewish population in America thinks, which I count myself as one of. But the group a little bit to the left of me, just the people who say I'm embarrassed to be Jewish, I'm like, well, we're embarrassed you're Jewish too. So, I have a little bit of anger towards them, because I feel like they're kind of just followers to some of the people that they admire on social media that are just more to the left. And I think like things have to come more to the middle to have it be an open discussion.
Well, that's a great place to leave it. We're almost at the hour mark. We're all about bringing people together and using music as a way to bring people together in dialogue and coexistence and peace, and focus on what we have in common and not what separates us. And you do that with your art as well. And we adore you so much, Jill, and we're so grateful that you spent this hour with us. And
I'm so grateful. Thank you, Danielle and Zach, and everybody for all of your questions. That's so nice. And I love that it's people from all over. And, it just makes the world feel a little smaller.
Well, we can't wait to be in person with you sometime soon. Take care. Keep doing what you're doing. Keep writing. I can't wait to read your next tablet piece. And, your honesty is so appreciated. And it's so nice to have a role model that shows that actually supporting Israel is a liberal cause. So we need more people.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay,
I really appreciate it. Thank you. Or as you say in LA, Danielle.
Yeah, I'm originally Canadian, so you can't,
Okay.
I'm innocent.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Jill. Take care.
Thank you guys. Have a great night.